All right, welcome into another PFF live free agent reaction video. Legal tampering is open, which means the news is starting to come thick and fast. But let's have a look at some of the biggest moves that have already been made, which almost all focus around the franchise tag. And the most obvious one to focus on, first and foremost, Solly, is Dallas slapped the franchise tag on Dak Prescott. They keep him in the building for at least another year while they try and work on long-term deals with Dak and presumably with Amari Cooper. What do you make of the Dallas move here?
Well, I don't like it. This is a dislike for me simply because I think they should have already had a deal done with Dak Prescott. Remember last year when the same quarterbacks in his draft class of Jared Goff and Carson Wentz, they got their deals right around $32 and $33 million annually. And so Dak was playing on a prove-it year in 2019. All he did was go out and prove it, okay, with 30 touchdown passes or more, and still no deal done. The reason why this hurts the Dallas Cowboys, even though there's a $26 million guaranteed to pay Dak Prescott, they could have used that tag on Amari Cooper. Now it looks like they get to retain Dak, but it looks like they're going to lose Amari Cooper. So they could have gotten a deal done with the quarterback and then tagged Amari Cooper and kept both of their best offensive players.
Yeah, those are good points, Solomon. I think the issue is given what's in front of Dallas, this is probably their only choice of action. If they were to apply the tag to Amari Cooper and let Prescott hit the open market, he's probably gone, and they're stuck finding a new quarterback. Dak was terrific, as you said a season ago, the second most valuable quarterback during the regular season per PFF WAR. They do have Michael Gallup in the fold. They do have a pretty good offensive line. They could probably curb some of the loss of Cooper, which is why I put this as a like for me. I don't like the broad approach that they've taken in signing Lawrence and Zeke and Jalen Smith, and then sloughing off on the two wide receiver and quarterback this season. However, for this given situation, I give this a like because they have to do this at this point.
Yeah, I agree with both you guys. It's a like for me as well for the same reasons as Eric, that I think at this point they have no other option. Their backup quarterback is Cooper Rush. That's not really an alternative as you look to the 2020 season. But I agree with you, Solly, 100% that they should have got this done some time ago because they wouldn't be left in this situation where this is the only option available to you. So you've got to tag him. You've got to keep him in the building. But crucially, you also need to try and do exactly the same thing to Amari Cooper, because the numbers that Dak has over the past two seasons with Amari Cooper there versus when he's not there are concerning. So you need to make sure that his number one target stays in the building as well. You now don't have the ability of the franchise tag to do that. You've got to work out a long-term deal with him before he gets exposed to the open market for everybody else as well. So it's a like for me, but only because the alternative at this point is pretty terrifying.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's the deal, guys. You get the sense that the Cowboys in the front office, they're playing checkers while everyone else is playing chess. Other teams are figuring out a way to keep their best players, and the Cowboys seem to be reactionary. For instance, they want to offer a contract to Dak Prescott that maybe should have been offered 1 year ago. And they asked him to play a prove-it deal, and he went out and did just that. And now they want to offer him the same contract. Someone forgot to tell the Cowboys that the price goes up each and every year, especially at the quarterback position. And Dak Prescott understands that, listen, I would have taken the $33 million a year last year when Goff and Wentz got their contract. Now the price has gone up, particularly now that we're with a new collective bargaining agreement and a much higher salary cap. He's wanting more, and I'm not so against the fact that I think he maybe deserves a little bit more than the $33 million.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a good chance that they're just on different pages when it comes to the value of Dak Prescott. Let's move on to the next guy to talk about, Ryan Tannehill, another player whose value has got to be a significant question mark. The Titans had their chance to franchise him, but instead they went in a different direction with that, and they got a long-term deal of sorts worked out with Ryan Tannehill. Where do we stand on this one? Do we like this deal or do we dislike it, Eric?
I'm a dislike here only because this is a situation where the franchise tag would have been a good move. Tannehill, somebody who, ended up starting 13 games and did accumulate a decent amount of value, more value than he accumulated the previous 3 seasons combined. However, a lot of it somewhat unstable in terms of, being the league's leading passer from play action, second highest rated passer when pressured. He takes a lot of sacks, which is something that if the offensive line doesn't get better and they have Jack Conklin being a free agent here, you might not get as good of infrastructure the following season. And the issue with this deal is when it first came out, we all thought it was a 2-year sort of deal, but it really isn't. I mean, the only way that they can get out from under Tannehill and only pay him for 2 years is if they let him go after 1 year. If they let him play for 2 years for them, they're on the hook for 3 years guaranteed. So it's really, this is their quarterback moving forward. And unfortunately, we've seen, with that Tennessee team and with that Tennessee offense, we just haven't seen a quarterback be consistently good for them, Mariota included, for quite some time.
Well, I'm going to say that I absolutely like it because I think John Robertson, the general manager in Tennessee, he understands who and what Ryan Tannehill is. And that's why the $29 million annually seems to be the right number. I know it's a little rich for some of our blood. I think we'll look back in a couple of years and find that this is really a mid-level deal. It's not north of $30 million, which is what the top quarterbacks are commanding. In a couple of years, the top quarterbacks are going to be commanding north of $35 million a year, but yet they'll have Tannehill right around 29. He was our highest graded player at the quarterback position during the 2019 season. And you're right, Eric, a lot of that lent itself to a lot of the things around him, a really good offensive line. But we know the receiving core wasn't the best. The emergence of A.J. Brown, I think they're going to go into this year's draft class and put another receiver around Ryan Tannehill. More importantly, I like it because it allows them to move on from the quarterback position. They didn't have to pay Tom Brady north of $30 million, but yet they also get to use the franchise tag on Derrick Henry. So this is the opposite of what the Cowboys did. They found a way to keep their quarterback, tag the running back instead of overpaying the running back. They went out and got it done. I think they can get a right tackle in the draft as well.
I like that as a selling point. I think that's a good way of putting it. But I'm going to break the tie between you two. I'm going to come down on Eric's side of this because I think ultimately I just don't see why you needed to do anything other than franchise tagging. Ryan Tannehill played phenomenally well last season, but there's no way that level of play sustains. He's going to decline to some degree. The only question is how far and how severe will it be, at which point it's franchise tag him. Let's see how bad the decline is, and then we could deal with him in the future if he comes anywhere close to backing it up. And if he doesn't, you can move on. You can get out of this deal. Instead, they've kind of locked him down for 3 years. Like you said, Eric, it looked initially like it might be a 2-year contract, and that wouldn't have been too bad, buying you a little bit of extra flexibility and security if he does back it up, or a bit of extra guaranteed money. I could have been on board with that. But the 3-year thing, I think, is a year too far, just a year too much into the unknown of Ryan Tannehill. And it was also, you could use the franchise tag on Derrick Henry. And let's pivot to that as our next guy. I'm not going to surprise anyone by saying that I think that is a terrible move. Dislike that intensely because, look, he's a running back. And as much as he was fantastic last year, Derrick Henry was not the reason that production was there. Before Ryan Tannehill became the starter, Derrick Henry was 11th in the league in rushing yardage. He was averaging 3.7 yards per carry. Tannehill comes in, changes everything. The offensive line develops, changes everything. Derrick Henry was the product of that Tennessee offense, not the creator of it. So I would not want any part in paying him big money. I would let him walk. And if the environment is still strong, somebody else will have that kind of production. What do you think, Solly? You're going to go the other way, right?
Yeah, I'm going to go the other way. I like it because it's a 1-year deal, and it's at around, $10 million a year for 1 year just to keep the train on the tracks and try to give the Tennessee Titans some hope of duplicating what they did in the second half of last year. I agree with you. It's a lot of money to go to one running back, but I do think he significantly changed during the second half of the season. We all know the story of him talking to Eddie George, and he changed the way that he began to attack defenders. He broke more tackles. His yards per carry went up from that 3.1 number that you mentioned, where he finished the season right around 5.1 yards per carry. Most of that created after contact. I do think a lot of it is predicated on the fact that he had a really good offensive line. And one might even argue, should they have extended the deal of Jack Conklin, who I like a lot, but I think they can get younger up front on the offensive line, particularly in the 2020 draft where there's some depth at that position. Conklin did show signs of breaking down due to injury. I think it's a one-year deal with Derrick Henry, and they can continue to have this offense with Tannehill and Henry. Again, this is an offense that found a way to do what the Dallas Cowboys didn't do, keep their two best offensive players.
Yeah, those are all good points. I think Derrick Henry, had the case to be made for being the best running back in the NFL a season ago at the things that do carry, which is getting yards after contact and breaking tackles and things of that sort. My concern here, and again, more to your point, it's a cheaper deal than paying him $15 million annually, like they would have if they gave Ezekiel Elliott that deal. My issue, and the reason why I'm tagging this a dislike, is just basically the sort of thing, what it tells you about their offense, which is they're going to be, reticent to give to give Ryan Tannehill the keys, despite having paid him this much money. Having Henry come back means that this is a run-first offense, which I think can obviously play for a little bit in the NFL, but long-term is probably not the type of offense you want to run out of your own free will.
All right, let's wrap this up by talking about a couple of quarterbacks first. One, the last re-signing we're going to hit before we end this with a little bit of speculation, but Kirk Cousins was re-signed by the Minnesota Vikings. And, they effectively liked the 3-year fully guaranteed contract they gave him the first time so much that they signed back up to it again and tacked on a couple more years of guaranteed money on the back end. For that reason alone, I can't say I love this deal. I'm kind of in the dislike camp because I think we've seen what those years of Kirk Cousins does. He played about as well as you could have expected this year, and it wasn't enough because the roster around him has eroded. So unless Cousins is able to become a player that we haven't seen from him yet, I don't think the Vikings are heading in the right direction. What about you, Eric? Where do you stand?
I think the same thing. I think, we got a good season out of Kirk a season ago. The Vikings still weren't able to, sort of overcome his shortcomings on the edges against teams like Green Bay, against teams like San Francisco, against teams like Seattle. He simply wasn't able to get it done. And then the issue here is without it, the Vikings played like 5 or 6 backup quarterbacks last year. Their offensive line stayed mostly intact. Their defense held on despite some bad personnel. And now you're going to see it even worse. They got rid of Xavier Rhodes. They got rid of Linval Joseph. Anthony Harris got tagged today, but it's unclear whether he'll return. Harrison Smith is sort of on the downward trajectory of his career, as good as he is. And so is the table going to be – and then they lose Stefanski. So is the table going to be set as well for Kirk Cousins as it was a season ago, where he admittedly played really well, especially in the month of October, and ultimately the Vikings still weren't a real contender for the Super Bowl, which is exactly the reason they signed him in the first place. So for me, that's why I dislike this, because I think the Minnesota Vikings should be considering a rebuild here as opposed to maintenance of the status quo.
See, I like it, and here's the reason why. A few years ago, when they gave Kirk Cousins the $84 million guaranteed contract, everyone just went, oh, this is the wrong thing to do. It turned out that it was the right thing to do. He took the team very far, but the other areas of this football team have deteriorated around Kirk Cousins. The offensive line, the defense is not what it used to be prior to the year when Kirk Cousins arrived. When Kirk Cousins stepped up, and as you mentioned, Eric, had a good year in 2019, we can point to so many other areas where the team has taken a step backwards, but yet he has taken the team further than where they had ever been. I think the number that he's going to get for 2020 is $28 million a year, which is below that number, right around 30. And then in the subsequent 2 years of this extension, he'll get around $33 million a year, where the top quarterbacks will be getting $35 to $37 million a year. He is still what we consider a second-tier quarterback. I think if you look at the contract, the numbers would suggest exactly that. The Minnesota Vikings, need to stop worrying about Kirk Cousins. He's really not the problem. He's more what's right than what's wrong. They are deteriorating in some of those other significant areas. They could not stop the run against the 49ers in the playoff game. And so they have to improve in so many other areas. I think this at least keeps them playing well at the quarterback position. I think he's proven that. And that's why they didn't want him to go into a lame duck year, into the final year of this contract before offering this deal. Because they know one thing, the price keeps going up.
All right, let's wrap it up with a little quick prediction. All these quarterbacks are dropping. They're being re-signed. They're being franchise tagged. But Tom Brady, the GOAT, the greatest of all time, is still out there. And apparently his market is dwindling. So where do we think Tom Brady is playing football in 2020? Let's start with you, Eric.
Well, I think it's Tampa Bay. Brady went from being minus 150 on the betting line to go back to New England to minus 150 in some spots to go to Tampa Bay. So, that would seem to indicate that there's some information that he likes Tampa Bay. I think it makes a lot of sense for him since they already have a ready-made offense in terms of a good play caller and good receivers. And a defense that last season was sneakily in the top 10. Todd Bowles, probably the best coaching job of any defensive coordinator last season. So that team in an NFC South that I think is a little bit, down with New Orleans probably regressing a little bit. That's a really good spot for Brady. I think he goes there.
You know what, Eric? We're sharing a brain here. I've said all along, I thought the Tampa Bay Buccaneers was the best place for Tom Brady, even better than going back to the New England Patriots. And I think as we sit here now on the clock, I think it's going to become cost prohibitive for the Patriots to bring him back with that $13.5 million cap hit above what contract they could even offer him. Let's face it, if you go back and take a look at Bruce Arians and Tom Moore, the architects of this Tampa Bay Buccaneer offense, they worked early in their careers in Indianapolis with one Peyton Manning. Tom Brady knows this. He knows that they will give everything over to the quarterback of his ilk, of his pedigree, and allow him to run the entire offense the way that he sees fit. Given the weapons surrounding Tom Brady in Tampa Bay and the defense that improved over the second half of the 2019 season, I think Tampa Bay is ready-made for Tom Brady. He's got better talent around him in 2020 than if he were to go back to the New England Patriots.
Yeah, I think from a weaponry standpoint, Tom Brady in Tampa Bay makes a lot of sense, but I cannot get my head around the concept of Tom Brady in a Bruce Arians air the ball out deep offense. It just doesn't work to me. I can't compute it. I won't let it happen. So I'm going to send it to the Raiders. I think desperation is going to hold out here. I think Brady is desperate to be somewhere other than New England the way things are panning out. And I think the Raiders are desperate to be relevant in Las Vegas and have a quarterback that can do something for them. Brady to Vegas is where I'm going. So that's where we stand at the start of free agency. Make sure you keep checking out the rest of our content. We'll be all over free agency despite our enforced isolation here in our houses. But check out the rest of our content, and thanks for listening.